There does appear to be some unrest in Moscow. For example, one of the top liberal economists, who's a university president there, has just been detained in what seems to be a politically motivated effort. So that could be a sign that the Kremlin, which is run by former KGB officers, is upset about the economic truth that the economists are telling them about the damage to the economy. And the economy is suffering, and it's going to suffer a lot more. This will have a direct impact on living standards of Russians. Remember, at the beginning, the Russians were hoping to take control of Ukraine's three largest cities: Kiev, the capital, Kharkiv, up in the northeast, close to Russia, and Odessa, the main Black Sea port. But Russian forces were ousted from around Kiev, and they've been ousted from around Kharkiv, although there are still Russian forces in artillery range for some of Kharkiv. And then the Russians were stopped down in the south. They could not get past Mykolaiv, which it needed to take in order to get to Odessa. So Russia has failed in seizing the three largest cities, and that's a pretty significant failure. What we're seeing now, as you correctly say, is small-scale fighting, or let's say small-scale advances and retreats in a couple of the areas. But the likelihood of major changes in the battle is not too great until more Western weapons get into Ukrainian hands. And that's likely to happen over the next few weeks or months.
It's interesting you raise the issue of weapons, because there are reports here in the Times newspaper, amongst others, saying that the West, especially the UK, are potentially starting to get low on these weapons because obviously you can't replenish them quickly and so many are being sent to Ukraine. How much of an issue is that for the West and also for Ukraine?
This is becoming an issue. At the beginning now, for the first couple of months of the fight, the main Western effort has been to get former Soviet weapons, which are held in East European countries that were under Soviet domination, to get those weapons, such as S-300 air defense missiles, into Ukraine. The main Western weapons at first were the Javelin anti-armor missiles and the Stinger anti-air missiles. But now the exhaustive supply of those former Soviet weapons is coming upon us. And so the West is going to start transitioning Ukraine more and more to NATO standard weapons. So those weapons are more capable.
And if they get that more capable weaponry that you're talking about, the Ukrainians, what impact will that have on the war and indeed on Putin's strategy?
So the main value of this weaponry, the artillery, the 155, and then the HIMARS, this is a rocket-based artillery system, which has a range about twice that of the 155 tube artillery. The main value of that is being able to strike command and control points and logistics support points beyond the battlefield, and therefore choking off support and command to the forces in the battlefield. That's a big concern for Russia, and that's something that the new Western weaponry going in there can play a big role in. Right now, the Ukrainians don't have weapons with enough range to be able to do those kinds of attacks on a large scale.
We've heard comments in the last 12 hours or so from the president of Belarus saying that there have been rockets which have been intercepted, fired from Ukraine into Belarusian territory. What do you think the implications of those comments are? Is this an excuse for Belarus to once again get involved in this conflict?
Nothing that Lukashenko or Belarusian officials said can be taken as truth. Yes, Lukashenko is using more aggressive rhetoric against Ukraine. He's under some pressure from the Kremlin and Moscow to do this. And so he is likely looking for excuses to be able to justify marshaling Belarusian forces. But there have been a lot of reports that Belarusian forces, Belarusian army, is not eager to get into this fight, and there could be significant opposition to that.
And let's talk, if we can, about what a victory would look like for the West in Ukraine. There's been lots of discussion, particularly the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson talking about that any settlement has to be decided by the Ukrainians what is right for them, what territory, if any, they would be willing to hand over to Russia in order to come to a peace deal. What do you think is the best outcome for Ukraine?
It's still too early to tell what could be the outcome, the likely outcome, or the best outcome. For example, the best outcome would be if Russia were to withdraw all of its forces. Now, that likely would not happen under the current Russian leadership, but if there were regime change internally generated in Russia because of the military setbacks in Ukraine and because of the cost of the economic sanctions, then that could be the best solution for just a total pullout of forces. And we should not rule that out, even though it may or may not be likely. It would be quite helpful in terms of a Western victory if the Russians occupied only Luhansk and Donetsk, or part of that, as well as Crimea. In other words, going back to the pre-February 24 boundaries. That would be a significant victory as well. But it's too soon to tell. With wars, with fighting, everything depends on where the battlefield will be when the time comes for peace negotiations or exhaustion by one side or the other.
I'm interested that you mention regime change because this is something that comes up every so often. What do you think the chances are of regime change, whether it is internally generated, as you talk about, or whether there is an external influence that could bring that about in Russia?
It's too difficult to make predictions about these things. There does appear to be some unrest in Moscow. For example, one of the top liberal economists, who's a university president there, has just been detained in what seems to be a politically motivated effort. So that could be a sign that the Kremlin, which is run by former KGB officers, is upset about the economic truth that the economists are telling them about the damage to the economy. And the economy is suffering, and it's going to suffer a lot more. This will have a direct impact on living standards of Russians. Those are going down. They could go down a lot, and they're already lower than they were before Russian aggression in 2014, when the West posed sanctions the first time. So regime change is likely to depend, if it occurs, and no one knows, on some combination of military factors, frustrations in Ukraine, and economic factors that could lead to social or political unrest.